Yeah. Okay, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen from Nigeria here. My name is Adebayo Adegbite, and I'm leading the ACA industry conversations. In the previous editions we've talked to professionals from across Africa, and then they've given us their insights on the African touring circuits in all the regions of the continent. So we're moving it outside Africa a bit, and then we're moving to Latin America. And I'm joined by Pablo Solis of the Connections Culturals Latino America. That's like an umbrella body of music industry professionals similar to the ACA here in Africa. So Pablo, it's nice to have you around, and we hope to have like a very interesting conversation over the next 30 or so minutes. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Okay, and the first question I'm going to be asking you, again, as someone who has experience in both continents, is so from an African perspective, I just want to know what's the touring circuit, music touring circuit as an industry professional in South America. I want to know what the touring circuit to South America is like. Can you like shed light on that for us?
Yes, thank you, Adebayo. Thanks for this interview. Hello, everyone that is looking this show or this video.
Yeah, the series.
So, my name is Pablo Solis. I'm Mexican and I live in Mexico City. And as Adebayo was mentioning, I am the director of Cultural Connexions Latin America, which is sister networks of Arts Connect Africa, but for Latin America. So we participate, festival directors, directors of venues, but some of them also. So the touring circuit in Latin America, to give like a short abstract, first we have to understand that Latin America is the whole region between Mexico and Argentina, to Argentina, including Brazil. So the main markets are, of course, Mexico because of its size. Mexico is 130 million population. Mexico has also a very strong national industry. We have our own artists that also vary the impact under sizes, but Mexican music and natural from Mexico. But as well, we have pop industry, rock industry, and other musical genres. The other big market in the region, of course, is Brazil. Brazil in itself is very but it's a 300 million country. So they have a large population and they have also a very powerful music industry. And there are a lot of festivals as well inside Brazil. Touring in Brazil can also be complicated in terms to connect the north with the south because it's a very, very large country. But they have a very important music industry there that works independent from any other country because it's huge enough to countries in terms of music. Of course, we have to mention Argentina. Argentina has been a very important music producer and music exporter since last century, in the 20th century. And then, of course, now other emerging markets are Colombia. So Colombia is also a very important market in terms for entering the region. They have also invested a lot in developing their own musical ecosystem. They have also invested a lot in exporting their music, and as a result, well, we have singers as Shakira or Juanes that are worldwide known. And now also they have a very active music industry. And then, so then the region is also very large. For example, it's a flight from Mexico City to Buenos Aires can be, you can spend more time traveling to Mexico to Buenos Aires than from Mexico to Europe. So touring in Latin America, you must consider that. And for example, between Mexico and Colombia, it's a 4 or 5 hours flight.
Okay, yeah.
And then, well, in between the region, it depends also the infrastructure. There are some countries more developed than others.
Yeah.
But for example, Central America, that for us is this little piece of land between Guatemala and Panama. The industry there is very small. There are not so many venues, not so many festivals. It's hard to tour in that region. Normally, big artists go Mexico, then to Colombia, then perhaps include Chile, then of course, bueno, Argentina, Brazil. So anyway, that's like just a first picture of the most important countries the music industry. And also, just to add, Adebayo, one important thing also, for example, in terms of streaming music, platforms such as Spotify have or did have in the last couple of years 3 or 4 capitals, cities in Latin America in the top 10 or top 20 countries with listeners worldwide in Spotify. Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Bogota, Santiago. So there is a huge use of digital platforms in Latin America, and that's why there is a lot of interest in coming into Latin America, especially in Mexico because of the size of the country as well. I think Spotify in Mexico is one of the largest markets. And since we are very close to the United States, and as well, sometimes Mexico works as a point of entry for the rest of the region.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that amount of insights. It's a good place as any to start from. Now, the question I want to ask next is now, looking at the side, the Latino American market, you've talked about the likes of Shakira, the likes of, you know, a lot of Latin American artists who have been doing a lot in the United States and in North America in general. So now, having been a professional in Latin America and then having done being a professional in Africa as well and being a bit familiar in a certain sense with the African industry. So what do you think the difference is? What do you think the African how the music industry in Latin America has grown so big, such that it's just not even in Latin America anymore, it has moved to the United States, even in Africa, because I do remember growing up in Nigeria, we did listen to a lot of Shakira, we did listen to a lot of Jennifer Lopez, you know, so like it's a big deal. So, but then Africa is starting to like catch up in a certain sense, but so what do you think, with your own experiences in Africa, what do you think the African industry needs to be doing to be able to get to that level, you know, level where, of course, we are seeing the likes of Burna Boy, likes of Davido, likes of Wizkid, also like the likes of Tyler, also making inroads in that sense. But what do you think the differences are between the Latino America and the African continent, or what do you think the African continent should be doing right? I think I should put it that way.
Okay, thank you, Adebayo. Well, the first thing to know to say is that I've been in contact with some important people in Africa thanks to this Arts Connect Africa network. But I cannot say I'm an expert on Africa, so I will try to speak more about Latin America and perhaps relay on what I have seen and what I know from the African continent. The first thing that I will have to say is that both regions are very similar in terms that they have been had this first relationship with Western civilization or with Western world. We do have a lot of similarities in terms of weather and climate. I have some African musician that has come to Mexico, for example, and they said they find a lot of similarities. We have a lot of fruits, we have good weather, there is sunny outside. The people as well has in terms similarities in terms of the amability, the behavior. But these, of course, are generalizations. The rest, we have also some countries that still need to develop a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of as well of inequalities between countries and as well between societies. So to say what has been the success of Latin artists in the world, that's a great question. I would like first to say that, for example, in Mexico at one point, Mexican music and then as well Argentinian music was were important music because in Mexico and Argentina there were big communication companies that helped to broadcast and to produce and to develop internal markets in their own countries. To give an example, to illustrate an example, Mexico had a huge company called Televisa. Televisa was like like the BBC or the NBC, like these huge communication companies that has a lot of power. Otherwise, I think Mexican music was and Mexican films, they occupy a market competition at that moment. They were the only ones producing TV shows in Spanish, film shows in Spanish, music in Spanish, but not only producing, but also exporting.
Oh, yeah.
So some, digamos, develop some infrastructure that help them also to have internal products, and then they need to expand and find opportunities in other markets. And then, for example, as well for Colombia, it was important as well, this interest of Colombia of exporting and changing their image of the country, and they invest a lot in promoting their own culture. And also, well, the other thing that I think is important, and this is also as well perhaps some speculation, but it has also to do with with the United States, because in the United States they have also discovered that the Spanish market is a very profitable one.
Yeah.
And there is another capital of Latin America inside the United States called Miami, where there is a lot of funds,
Yeah.
there is a lot of
Yeah.
as well of industry, music industry, film industry, investment funds. And from there, they have also developed a platform to expose to the world the music from Latin America. So I think there some of the explanations of how and why um, Latin American music has been exposed globally. And so there is like for this sense, it is it is important to notice that. But from also from a Latin American perspective as well, and this is something that a conversation that we have also recently had. Last week, for example, I was participating in a music conference in San Diego in the United States, where the focus of the conversation was to speak about la Latinidad, the Latin population, the Latin diaspora in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is relevant because it's the fastest growing population in the USA. They are Spanish is the second largest market and the most speaking language after English.
English.
So there is a real market opportunity there. But also what we were speaking about that is that, for example, United States created a character like Jennifer Lopez that was a Latin diva, but it was a Latin diva built on the um, on the format of the market, but not really on the diversity and identity of a general perspective of Latin America. So what I think also is that for us, it's also important to show and to support and as well to create this worldwide artists, but that really have a sense of a perspective from Latin America, from a like a Latin American industry, and not from a Hollywood industry, because the interests are different. Because Jennifer Lopez is more we see that as a more market oriented perspective than like a real identity of Latin Americans.
Oh, okay. So, well, thank you for that, because that was a very good response, because you actually answered, sort of answered the next question I was going to ask in a way, because I was going to say what benefits could both the African and the Latin American industry offer themselves in terms of culture exchange. And then you've talked about how like we have cultures that are similar, and so we find points of similarities. Talked about Spanish language, and so which means our languages could actually be a very, very interesting market, which is actually something James Tillman said from Angola, that, one of the most popular genres of African music is the rumba from Angola, which though it's in Portuguese, but it's very, very popular in the United States in the English-speaking population. So I'm happy to hear you confirm that. So the next question is, I'm going to be asking about the ACA and the CCLA partnership. Okay, that's actually like a first step in bringing cultural connections between Latin America and Africa together. So how important do you think such partnerships are in developing both music industries? As I said, we've had our Wizkids, our Davidos having collaborations with South American artists. As at the time I was speaking, I think Rema and Selena Gomez had this Calm Down remix that now is about the most streamed song on Spotify. But then from a music professional perspective, not from an African music perspective now, so what do you think is the benefits of that kind of cultural connection between the ACA and the Cultural Connections Latino America? What do you think the benefits will be for the industry moving forward?
Well, Adebayo, that's a great question and a great topic of discussion. I will first say that we have an historical link that needs to be addressed because we had a huge connection with Africa because we receive a huge diaspora of African population during colonial times in Latin America. That was in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries.
Yes.
So and we have not addressed that connection yet. The connections right now between Africa and Latin America are weak. We don't have those many connections. Is first because they are far away, and second because both regions are more connected with their colonialist countries, right?
Yeah,
For
true.
example, Latin America is very connected first with Spain, and then, for example, Brazil with Portugal.
Portugal, yeah.
And I understand as well that Africa is, for example, is connected with the United
The
Kingdom, with
Kingdom
all the
and
countries that
France.
are English speaking, with France for all the Francophone speaking, and with Portugal with all the Lusophone Portuguese speaking countries. So we need to switch those connections and start making the connections between Latin America and Africa directly. So that is very important. And it's also very important because the diaspora that arrived from Africa to Latin America really multiply the culture of the music, the dances, the culture of this region of the world. Now, what we call traditional Latin American music, it has a strong influence on African heritage. Cuban music with most of the Cuban music comes from la clave de son or la clave de rumba, which is these two, three rhythms. Um, are rhythms from Africa, originally coming from Africa. Most of the drumming music in Latin America comes from the African diasporas. So and of course there are some countries that have more African diasporas or Afro-descendant populations than others, but they did bring and infuse a lot of and influence a lot of what we call now our Latin American music. Um, so that is a link very important that we need to address for social reasons, for political reasons, and then of course for economic reasons. Because, for example, well, yeah, there are many. I can tell many examples. Um, so that is why it's important to make those connections between Africa and Latin America.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Now that you're again still on the question of the connection between the Ask Connect Africa and the Cultural Connections Latin America, now the question I want to ask, which will be like perhaps like the final question before, or like the second to the last question before the final question, and then we'll call it an evening on this very great session is, now that there's a connection between the ACA and CCLA, so what, and then as a prominent figure within the CCLA, what dimensions do you think are you expecting to see? You've talked about, why this thing is important. So what are your expectations? What are the things that you're expecting to see in the near future from a professional perspective? Now, of course, we know that artists will collaborate, perhaps Rema or Burna Boy or some other African artists will collaborate with another Latino America artist again, and they'll probably make a hit. But from a professional perspective, where like event promoters, producers, perhaps booking managers, what are the specific, if I may put it that way, of that connection that you're expecting to see going forward? The connections between CCLA and ACA.
So the first thing that I see is that so we have that need of connecting that historical link that has been broken. But also what I see is that there is a market opportunity there because so again, it depends on the country and the connections with Africa. For example, I will say that Colombia, that has also a huge Afro-Colombian population, they have very special links with some countries and some cultures in Africa. There are a lot of African artists that travel to festivals in Colombia, to
Mm.
some specific regions. I would say, for example, in the region of in the Caribbean of Colombia, in the around Cartagena, Barranquilla, there are some festivals that receive huge African artists.
Process, yeah.
And also in that region, for example, they have a version of sucus music that is called champeta. And this champeta is really influenced directly from all the music that came from Africa, from sucus music. So these artists do travel to Colombia, but then they don't travel to any other country because there is the population is not the same. The interest, the cultural interests are not the same. There are some exceptions for that. In the region, there are some world music festivals. And so, yeah, for my perspective is that there is an opportunity there. And as well, since we have a lot of our popular music like salsa, cumbia, son cubano, all that music has an influence from of African culture. So I think that the population will like that music, and we just need to build and develop uh, that market. And for that, that is the importance of working together, of on developing those networks. Um, we might have perhaps it. I will say that, for example, what I have been listening to the previous conversation in this series, the difficulties of traveling inside Africa. Perhaps in Latin America is a little bit easier to travel inside the region. Like, for example, we don't have to go to Europe to go to South
Yeah,
America, or we
yeah.
don't have to travel to the United States to go to Guatemala. No, we can travel directly, but there's still some countries that the connections or the flights are not so common. The distance are also important to
Maybe a
consider.
bit of a problem, yes.
And then, of course, it's not cheap to travel by plane because there are not so many exchanges yet. So we need to improve that. So it is possible, but yeah, but it is hard. So we need to focus and we need to make alliances. We need to work together. We need to work in coordination because there are huge efforts in bringing an artist, in developing an artist, in developing a scene, in establishing a festival, or even keeping alive a venue. Uh, so yeah, there is a lot of opportunities, and there is a need of working together to make things happen.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much. And then my final question on what again has been a very insightful session. We'll now go to, well, we've talked about a practical perspective as to what should be done and all that. Now I'll go for a more idealistic, well, let me say more optimistic perspective from you or as to, so what are your hopes? So what are your hopes for African music? I mean, like the future of Latino and African music collaboration. If, of course, as I said, the CCLA and ACA have started a very big, they've set a very big ball rolling and started a very great journey. So what are your hopes from an idealistic perspective now? And what are you for the Latino music, Latino and the African music industry?
Well, first, I would say that my hope is that both Latin American and African artists can also start hitting the mainstream stage and top charts around the world, because that will also help to give visibility to the huge cultural diversity that in both regions exist. So my hope is to really develop new markets, to really develop new festivals with alternatives, music scenes, where all these different perspective of living and expressing the lives around the world can be appreciated. I would love to see as well collaborations. I would love to see as well more exchange and connections between both regions. And of course, I think the dream of all of us will be to have touring networks in both
Yeah,
regions
yes.
to happen. Um, so yeah, to make successful events, to make those cultural connections, to start also seeing artists collaborating, because there are some examples of huge success. I know there is, like salsa and rumba and all of that is also very popular in some countries in Africa.
Yeah.
Also, African music is also very popular in some countries in Latin America. And as I see it, of course, I see it as a market opportunity. There is a room of opportunity that as of now perhaps nobody has uh, taken it, and perhaps we can we can find that and create that and find benefits yes, for both territories and for both industries or industries in the two regions.
Oh, okay. Well, that was again very, very insightful addition to the debate. Pablo, it's been a very, very insightful session with you. And I really, really learned a lot of things about it. And you really, really did answer a lot of the questions that I'm sure the people who view the video will have on the connections between the two countries. So so in summary, my name is Adebayo Adegbite once again, and this is the ACA Industry Conversations International Markets. Like another phase of the ball we started with the African markets. And I've been with Pablo Solis. We've talked about a lot of things, the nature of the touring circuits in the Latino music industry, why the Latino music industry has grown, what Africa can learn from it, and then what we need to do as a cultural connections, what the cultural connections between the ACA and CCLA is going to achieve, and then finally his hopes and dreams for collaborations between the Latino music industry and the African music industry. So once again, thank you very much, Pablo, for joining this. I'm sure hopefully sometime in the future we'll have a much longer conversation than this on this subject, because it's actually a very, very interesting subject to talk about. I'm not going to lie about that. So yeah. So thank you very much, Pablo, for coming in. Thank you very much for everybody who is going to watch this and who is going to perhaps learn one or two things from it, and who is also going to enjoy it, because of course it was a very enjoyable interview. So of course, thank you very much. We'll catch up some